Welcome to the Resurrection Church podcast. My name is Bradley. I'm one of the pastors here at Resurrection Church, and I'm joined in person by two of my favorite people.
Cody Fields, I'm one of the deacons here.
And I'm Stan Fields, one of the pastors here.
You have to pause and think about it.
It's like
It's still new enough.
I know when you use that term on, I'm not sure if it was last Sunday or maybe the Sunday before that. You said I'm one of the pastors here, and I was like, "Who's that?" Oh, it's me.
That would be me. Yeah. So it's, and if you haven't listened to the, I guess this will come out after the episode we just recorded. So go back and listen to that about your story and how you came on staff. But we're glad to have you guys. Normally, what you get on our feed, podcast feed, is teaching from our Sunday morning services, but we'd like to talk about topics and have conversations supplemental to that. And one of the things we've been talking about is politics and culture war. We've covered a lot of things, on that topic, and seems like an election just happened.
Did it?
It did. Boy, howdy, did it.
2028 commercial started yet?
Yeah, right.
Run continuously.
But it's happened. We have a new president-elect. We have a lot of changes going on in the House and the Senate. And as you might expect, there's a lot of scrambling right now.
Yes.
And big part of that scrambling is like, I guess, a quest to prove on both sides of the aisle that they have cornered the market on truth.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this is something that you wanted to talk about. We've been talking about doing podcasts on this politics and stuff for a long time. But one of the things you wanted to talk about is something that's called a genetic fallacy.
Right.
So that people may not be familiar with that term. Why don't you define that?
Right. So hopefully nobody just hit pause and started listening to something else as soon as they heard that term.
Now, this one's going to be fun. Stick with us.
Right. So the dictionary definition, it's a logical fallacy of irrelevance in which arguments or information are dismissed or validated based solely on their source of origin rather than their content.
Which, boil that down, put the cookies on the low shelf.
So a claim is made, and then it's either ignored or given credibility based on the source, rather than what the claim actually says.
Yeah, and if I can just insert this, and I don't want to go down this rabbit trail because we totally could. One of the big debates in the church world right now is, should we sing songs that come from this church, this ministry, this label, based on what we know about, for example, Bethel, Hillsong, Elevation. Those are sort of the big three that people are, a lot of churches are getting to the point where they just will not even touch a song if it comes from one of those three. Right. And I get that.
Right.
I think there are reasons to say that might be the right thing to do. But here at Res, what we've said is that, at least for now, is that we judge songs based on the content, not on their source of origin.
And it just happens that the songs that we're playing don't come from those places.
But John Wesley wrote hymns, and we would have pretty significant doctrinal differences with John Wesley, and yet he wrote some great hymns that have great content. Sure. So that's what you're talking about, is not judging information based on the source, but on the content.
Right.
Is what we're getting at there.
Right. And since we're Bible people, well, are there biblical examples of whether it's the command or even just examples of that happening?
Yes.
And so we've got 1 Thessalonians 5. Do you want to read that, Padre?
Sure. So it's verses 19 through 22. Do not quench the spirit. Do not despise prophecies, but examine all things. Hold fast to that which is good. Abstain from every form of evil.
Yeah, and some translations, like maybe the Old King James, say abstain from the appearance of evil, which is, we've all had some experience with legalistic church traditions that leverage that verse to say, well, don't get caught in a liquor store parking lot, or whatever, because you're not abstaining from the appearance of evil, right? Don't sit in a parked car with your girlfriend, even if you're not doing anything, because you'll abstain from the appearance of evil. That's not what Paul's talking about.
Right.
What's he talking about?
Right. Testing all things.
Testing all things. Don't quench the spirit. Don't despise prophecies. Okay. We're not a cessationist church. We do believe in the gift of prophecy. And when a prophecy is given, what should we do? We test it. Test it against the word of God and hold fast to what is good, but it's abstain from every evil. So you don't, and we were talking about this beforehand, Balaam in the Old Testament prophesied on behalf of Yahweh, and he was a pagan.
Right.
So you can't judge Balaam by his background and history. You can't judge his prophecy by that. You have to judge it by whether or not it was actually the word of God. Right. And that's what Paul's getting at here.
Right. So another example. So you'll get to teach through this soon in the upcoming sermon series going through the Gospel of John.
Absolutely.
So you'll get to reference the genetic fallacy if you so choose. So either of you read that one.
I'll read it. John 1:43-46. On the next day, he desired to go into Galilee, and he found Philip. And Jesus said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, the city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him of whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And Philip said to him, "Come and see." It's basically the question of, how is anybody of any significance or importance going to come out of that town?
Right.
Right? It's a prejudice based on how you see that town. And Philip's like, no. Don't judge him by Nazareth. Come and see for yourself.
So this is textbook dictionary genetic fallacy.
Yep.
He's from the wrong part of town or the wrong town altogether.
Yep.
So how can this even be a thing?
Yep.
Last one from Acts 17. Take it, Padre.
Acts 17, verses 10 and 11. And the brothers immediately sent Paul and Silas away by night to Berea. And when they arrived, they went into the synagogue of the Jews. Now these were more noble-minded than those in Thessalonica, for they received the word with great eagerness, examining the scriptures daily to see whether these things were so.
So they didn't just take his word for it because he was some charismatic, flamboyant preacher, even though we know from other texts that Paul wasn't particularly gifted at speaking, but they examined the content of his claims for what they were and then evaluated them.
And what's interesting is, from the previous example about Jesus coming out of Nazareth, you could almost see that as a negative. Like there would be the temptation to dismiss Jesus because of where he came from. Right? Whereas in Acts 17, the temptation might be, for some at least, to accept whatever Paul says because it's Paul.
Right.
But instead they searched the scriptures to see if what Paul was saying was so.
Yep. So I think to further play this out into a more modern day application, let's do a little game. And I'll read a quote and then later we'll figure out who said it.
Okay.
And I think we'll all be surprised by some things. Fair?
Sounds good.
Okay. So, first quote. "We are fighting for the gay community. With the help of many of the people here tonight in recent years, our movement has taken incredible strides. The strides you've made here are incredible." Okay, so that's the first quote. Second quote. Though the differences remain among us, I can't read. Though differences remain among us which are significant, the combined total of the proposed savings that are common to both plans is more than enough, using the numbers from your congressional budget office to balance the budget in 7 years and to provide a modest tax cut. End quote. Okay? Number 3. So this is in reference to a Uganda law which criminalized certain forms of homosexuality, particularly taking advantage of disabled people and children.
Wow. Okay.
So, quote, "This Uganda law is horrific and wrong," and the ampersand is probably the worst thing about this quote. I am totally against ampersands. But anyway, This Uganda law is horrific and wrong. Any law criminalizing homosexuality or imposing the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality is grotesque and an abomination. All civilized nations should join together in condemning this human rights abuse #LGBTQ, end quote. Mm-hmm. And number 4, this one will be the most surprising for everybody, I can promise you. Quote, abortion is unnatural and unnecessary. Man is the only animal who practices such wanton killing of its young, and yet man considers himself emancipated and more highly evolved than any other species. Legalized abortion would have a disastrously demoralizing effect on our society, for it would further instill the notion that human life is one of the cheapest commodities in the world.
Wow.
So, number 1, I don't know if you remember when I ran these by you several months ago.
I don't.
Okay. Any guesses on number 1?
These are not people from our church, I'm assuming.
No, these are not.
Nobody we know.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, you would tend to think that a quote like this would come from the left.
Right.
You know, perhaps the moderate left, but maybe even the extreme left. On the surface, you would expect this from a Nancy Pelosi type or
Pete Buttigieg.
Yeah, right.
So that was actually one Donald J. Trump in 2022. So just a couple of years ago at the Log Cabin Republican Lincoln Gala at his home in Mar-a-Lago.
Right.
The Log Cabin Republicans are a homosexual Republican group.
Right.
So there you have it. We are fighting for the gay community, Donald J. Trump.
Yep.
So number 2, the differences that remain among us, which are significant, but we're going to balance this budget in 7 years and cut taxes.
Well, tax cut makes me think conservative.
Right.
Right.
You know, Republican perhaps.
Right.
If not libertarian.
Right.
I'm gonna take a guess because I think I remember this quote.
Ooh.
That's how old I am.
Yep.
I think this was Bill Clinton.
It was.
Yeah, okay.
It was Bill Clinton in his 1996 State of the Union address.
And I did not look ahead, so I do remember. I do remember that.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, so we've got this one about this Uganda law being horrific and wrong, and talking about this as a human rights abuse #LGBTQ. Mm-hmm. So that one also sounds more from the left.
Definitely.
Definitely does. Yeah.
Well, it was Ted Cruz,
Ted Cruz.
which is pretty surprising for any conservative. He's a Christian, as far as we're aware. He makes a proclamation of faith. Seems like a good guy. Has a good beard.
Yeah. Well,
And a
and
mullet.
and we're not necessarily judging these quotes from the standpoint of whether or not they're right, wrong, true, or false. We're just you're simply pointing out. Like I don't think that a Christian would, you know, I know what the Old Testament says, but I don't think that a Christian would argue that it would be right for a modern civilization to enact the death penalty on, you know, homosexuality.
Right. Most would argue against the death penalty, though there were laws against it in the United States until about 10 minutes ago.
Yeah, right.
And particularly public displays of it. And
Yeah,
stuff like
the point is, it's just surprising that it would come from a conservative like Ted Cruz.
Right. So number 4, we had a very forceful quote on abortion. Legalized abortion would have a disastrously demoralizing effect, and it would further instill the notion that human life is one of the cheapest commodities in the world.
That does not sound like that would come from the left, because I mean we know their platform. I mean they ran and lost this election thinking that, you know, the vast majority of Americans would turn on this one particular issue.
Right. So that was published in 1971. So in the midst of the Roe v. Wade debate, if I recall correctly, because that was decided in 73. And that was written by Anton LaVey, who is the founder of the Church of Satan.
Wow. Wow.
And that you can find that in Letters from the Devil.
Wow.
March 21st, 1971.
Wow. Anton
I
LaVey.
did not see that one coming.
No.
Didn't see that one coming at all.
No. So,
Wow. Wow.
so
Wow.
lots of unexpected sources for those quotes. But we would be tempted to say, oh, well, Trump said that, or Anton LaVey, who hasn't said many good things in his life, but he
No.
did say that one really, really well. And so we need to actually weigh the thing based on the content of it.
Well, and doesn't this get at the heart, maybe, you guys press on this, of why we're so divided right now and why it's so hard to have civil discourse around political, social issues, healthy debate. I mean, why can't we, a pro-life and pro-choice person, sit down and have a rational conversation?
Right.
It's because the minute you identify somebody as being Republican or Democrat, conservative or liberal, pro-life, pro-choice, you're immediately tempted to dismiss everything that they say.
Right.
As opposed to actually listening to the content.
Right. Right. So, this topic kind of starts to bring out our individual biases that we kind of have innately, and we all have them. If I hear certain people start to talk, and some of them who I normally agree with, but I just don't like them, right? We need to have room for a category like that.
Right.
Like, I don't want to listen to them, like, just innately. But there was a poll last year and this isn't about Trump, right? But this is just an example, because I think this is true across the political spectrum, the religious spectrum, the theological spectrum, all of it. But there was a poll last year of Trump supporters from YouGov and CBS News. So this is a good, reliable poll, typically.
Okay.
They typically do a pretty good job. They asked these Trump supporters if they trusted what Trump would tell them over friends and family, other conservative media figures, and over their pastor or other religious leaders.
Wow.
So 71% would trust Trump over friends and family. 63% would trust Trump over other conservative media figures. And I understand that to some
I was about
degree.
to say, I kind of identify with that.
And 56% would trust Trump over their pastor.
Oh,
That's a little mind-blowing to me.
We need to poll Rez on this question.
no, we don't. No, we don't.
I might like regret that.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there was a 2018 Barna survey that said that 51% of churchgoers have never even heard of the Great Commission.
Oh, wow.
So
That would not be true of Rez.
that would not be true of us. Absolutely. Other churches, I can see where that would be the case.
Could be, yeah.
And so that would be a point of criticism for us of them. However, I think this shows some imbalance in how we think of our political figures, whether it's Trump, whether it's Kamala Harris, whether it's Joe Biden, Barack Obama, whoever. This is on the left. I actually just had an interaction on Facebook with someone who was convinced that thousands of kids are killed in school shootings every year, which is not true. It's statistically not true that number of children are killed in school shootings every year. And so it's like, okay, first off, let's back up. How many are actually killed? That's too many, yes.
Yes.
But it's not that.
It's not that.
Right? Or, that the people who believe that Trump is explicitly racist or something like that.
Right.
Where there's no evidence to that.
Right.
And so it's back up a little bit.
Yeah.
And actually think about the claims that are being made. And if you can help it, find a primary source. So if somebody's talking about, did you hear about what this politician said? Here's a great example of Bill Gates did a talk called Innovating to Zero. And some people have taken a quote out of context to think that he's talking about innovating to 0 people populating the earth. And what he's talking about is 0 people dying due to climate change.
Okay.
However you think about that.
Right.
Right. That's not what he's talking about. Right.
So,
and you can actually just search and find his original talk on YouTube. So
So let me ask this question. because I don't think this only applies in the political sphere. I think
No,
I think
absolutely.
it also applies in the church.
Yes.
Right? It is when someone is, let's say, consistently saying things that aren't true.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it's a well-known pastor in his pulpit or it's a politician.
Mm-hmm.
When there's a consistent pattern
Mm-hmm.
of non-truths, false claims, how do we steward that? Because there is like over time, I mean, people build a track record. I mean, we talk about like someone being trustworthy or not,
Right.
and there is this thing that we all experience where someone, in one sense, they lose their credibility.
Yes.
And the temptation would be to dismiss everything that they say.
Right. So I think there's a difference between like the genetic fallacy, evaluating claims based on what the claim is, right? And outright dismissing it because it came from somebody I usually disagree with. Yeah. But in terms of actually having trust, that should, I think, at least cause us to evaluate more heavily when they say something. Does that make sense?
No, it does.
Because like if I have a friend, for instance, who I know exaggerates pretty constantly or is a habitual liar and says, man, I was totally in this car wreck and my car flipped 3 times. You can't tell by looking at the car, but my car flipped 3 times.
Right.
I'm going to look at the car and be like, show me the Carfax.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Show me the police report and then I'll believe you. And so I think, actually evaluating and putting someone under more scrutiny is absolutely warranted when they have a track record. When they have a track record of just spewing falsehoods repeatedly.
Like I ran into this recently, not with political. And let me be clear, I'm not going to put politics and social issues on the same shelf as doctrine and theology.
Right.
That those are there's way more important things to be wrestled with in terms of biblical doctrine. But a brother recently told me, and this is a guy who grew up in a Presbyterian church, cessationist doctrine, and has recently, as he's read his Bible, and I think he's a good reader of the Bible, become more open to a continuationist approach to spiritual gifts, and particularly like the possibility that God still wants to do miracles, still wants to do amazing things to put his glory on display and spread the gospel, which I would be inclined to agree with. And he's a little bit cage stage with that, I think. Okay. Yeah. Like maybe we all were at one point when it comes to the doctrines of grace.
I wouldn't know what you're talking about.
But nevertheless, he...
you built the cage, man.
I did.
You got to think about where this guy's coming from.
Right.
He was told, no, this stuff doesn't happen anymore. And then he starts reading his Bible and he goes, wait a minute. Spirit's still at work. And he takes a vacation with his wife out to California. And guess where they go to church one Sunday?
Yep.
They go to Bethel. And at Bethel, this is a guy that I would trust to run things, whether it be songs, prayers prayed, what was taught that particular morning, through a good, healthy, robust biblical filter. The songs they sung, the atmosphere of worship, the order of the service, and what Bill Johnson taught that morning, in his opinion, was really, really, really good. And his argument at that point is then like, he's almost, I wouldn't say he's a Bill Johnson apologist or a Bethel apologist, but he's inclined to be a little bit more defensive of them, but because most of who he runs with or who he's associated with in where he lives here would be anti, because there's a track record, right? There's like almost like a library of content that's come out of Bethel and Bill Johnson that you go, no, that's heretical.
Right.
But yet, like, I wrestled with that because is it possible that he went to a particular service and the songs that were sung and the sermon that was taught actually did glorify Jesus and represent at least that in
that time.
That time.
Right. The blind squirrel found the acorn. You know,
Yeah.
It could be that,
yeah.
right?
And he just happened to be there for that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's another example is I've kind of been witnessing some of this online in the Twitter world, and some of the guys that I listen to, like James White, has been dealing with some of this. There's a podcast called Stone Choir. I don't know if either of you are familiar with it, and particularly a guy named Corey Mailer, who has now been excommunicated from the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod for being a white supremacist, going so far as to say that interethnic marriages are equivalent to murder of your genetic line.
Wow.
And saying that the children of interethnic marriages are excrement. So just horrific stuff.
Wow.
While at the same time recognizing every now and then he says something true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't recall any of the true things he said. I don't recommend perusing his Twitter feed or listening to that podcast at all. But every now and then he gets something right, like abortion being murder.
Yeah.
Right? So totally agree with him on that. He claims to be a Christian, right? So if he says Jesus is Lord, I got to agree with that.
Yeah.
While at the same time recognizing that those things that you're saying are horrific enough that I'm not going to listen to you, and I'm never going to recommend anybody else listen to you.
Right.
And so I think we'd do the same thing with Bill Johnson.
Yep.
We would tell people to steer clear from him unless you're researching things for a research project or something like that.
Yeah. Because it's also possible for someone to say something that is true, even if they're not, if their take on what they said is off.
Right.
Case in point,
Yeah.
when the Sanhedrin was gathered together against Jesus, and there's, you can sort of imagine the back and forth that was going on about what do we do with this guy. And Caiaphas stands up and says, "You guys are fools. Do you not realize that it's better for one man to die for the nation than the whole nation perish?"
Right.
And that's in John's gospel. And John says he didn't know it, but he was prophesying.
Right.
Now, obviously, his understanding of what was coming out of his mouth was off, but what he was actually saying was true.
Yeah.
Right.
It's better for Jesus to die for God's people than for God's people to perish.
Right.
Right? It's
Right.
like that. This is a challenging thing. And the word that keeps coming to mind as we work through this is we need discernment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of times that requires slowing down.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a knee-jerk reaction pounded out on Twitter or Facebook or whatever within 30 seconds of seeing a headline.
Yeah.
You can take a minute. There have been things that I've waited literally a week and a half to post about so I can get more details.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to just spout stuff off and then be totally wrong.
I've been so guilty of, in a previous job, not this one, in a previous job, something happened, and I was really ticked that it happened, and I wrote up this email as a response to what happened, and I knew in my heart, I knew that I needed to slow down, and my intent was to hit the print button.
Oh, no.
So I could print it out, take a step back, read it in a different format, but I hit the send.
Oh, man.
And it went out. It didn't blow back too hard, but there was a little blowback.
You know, James writes and says, let us be quick to listen and slow to speak, slow to become angry.
Yep.
We really need to implement that. We need to lean into that all the more. I'll be honest and transparent to say that when, I don't know, several years ago, it seemed like we were having these repeated episodes of police brutality, and it was just like this huge thing that was just blowing up everywhere. And I'm not saying that there weren't genuinely some instances where police officers were way out of line.
Yeah.
And people lost their lives because of it.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I was, on a couple of occasions, too quick to speak and not, quick to listen.
Right.
And maybe, I think there were at least one occasion where I addressed one of those things from the pulpit. And if I had it to do over with again, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
Because the details that came out later
Yep.
proved that it wasn't how the media was presenting it to me, and presenting it to us.
Right.
And I remember sometime after that, another episode happened, and somebody in the church texted me. They're no longer at Res, so don't try to guess who they are. But they texted me and they were like, "Why are you not addressing this? Why are you not speaking to this?" And I responded back and I said, "Because there's not enough time has gone by for me to get a real accurate. I wasn't there. I didn't witness it. I didn't see it happen. All I see is the clips. All I hear is the pundits giving their opinion. I'm going to wait and give it some time before I judge it because I could be wrong."
Yeah. James White has said this many times on the dividing line, but when the reformers were, getting their treatises out and stuff like that, Luther getting the 95 Theses out, one of the things that made it seem very fast was the invention of the movable type printing press. But they still had months between communication, like when he was debating Erasmus on things. It was literally months and sometimes a couple of years between correspondence.
Wow.
And now it's, you can bang out a comment in 20 seconds. And if you haven't responded in 10 minutes, then you're just a coward.
Wow.
And we're so quick now, as opposed to just take a minute, breathe, and figure it out. Most of the time, it's not as bad as you think. And sometimes it's not what it's been portrayed as at all.
Yeah.
So just take a minute.
Yeah. Don't jump to conclusions.
Yep.
And last thing, and we'll wrap it up here, is we're living in a day and age where there is more information coming to us than I think we're capable of stewarding.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth us pausing and acknowledging that, that so much information is coming at us so fast, it's really hard to make accurate judgments. And we do just need to slow down and be careful not to jump to conclusions. Have Bible-soaked minds as we consider not just the source, because genetic fallacy doesn't mean that you don't consider the source at all.
Right.
It just means that you consider the source and primarily the content before you make a judgment.
Right. And one thing that I've started to instill in my mind is just realizing when I can't do anything about something. Like if something happens in Wisconsin that is a county issue, I don't necessarily need to get bent out of shape over that when I hear about it. It's like, well, that happened. All right. I'll move on with my life. Right. Whereas if something happens in this church, in my small group or something like that, then I need to be a little more invested in that, right? As opposed to really super duper caring about the thing that happened in Wisconsin.
You don't have to be fuzzy on truth in order to be patient.
Right.
So, well, good. That's good stuff, Cody.
Leave it there. You don't have to be fuzzy on truth to be patient.
Thanks for joining us.